with a lot. And when you find the time, I'd rather not spend the rest of this winter tied to this fucking couch!
Shh, it's the Film Flamers.
Hey everybody, I'm Robert.
Hey guys, I'm Chris.
And we're the Film Flamers, bringing you another Top 10 episode.
This time we'll be counting down our picks for the top 10 alien horror movies of all time. God, I've been watching too much Watch Mojo or something.
Well, not necessarily our picks. This time, you'll be giving your definitive top 10 list of aliens and horror.
That's right, and you'll be giving a little history lesson in aliens and horror, won't you?
That's right. So, if you recall from our episode last December where we covered Black Christmas, we also had a top 10 slashers where I gave my top 10 favorites, and Chris gave us a sort of, history of the slashers throughout the decades and, all the movies that were sort of leading up to that, golden age of slashers in the 80s and beyond. And while Chris has a much better knowledge of science fiction and science fiction horror, I thought that it's best to let him, give the movies for y'all to go and watch or give his choices and maybe try my hand at, a little history lesson of aliens in the movies.
So I feel like my knowledge is actually better with just science fiction or just horror or just fantasy, but like actually like alien horror movies, I found that I have some blind spots. So this list might get updated sooner rather than later. Who knows? But for now, this is the definitive Film Flamers list.
And, I worked pretty hard on my history lesson. I chose, some different movies and things to talk about. And not all of them are going to be horror movies, because I think if you're talking about aliens and horror or aliens in film as history, you can't just have horror movies. You sort of have to have some other mentions in there. So. Well,
of course, because everything influences everything else. Just if you listened to our episode on Alien, you know that it had a bunch of, genre jumping influences, and so I'm sure some of those will actually show their faces on your history lesson.
I think so. Well, do you want to go ahead and get started with that then? Are
Sure.
you ready, class? Okay. So, obviously before movies were a thing, there was already written fiction about life from outer space. I think most notably people will think of War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, which was published in 1898. It would later be adapted many, many times. I think most recently there was a grand epic BBC version of War of the Worlds that is very recent, right? And before that we had the Tom Cruise movie here in America.
By Spielberg.
Yep. And so, but I think most memorably, the incarnation that people will think of for War of the Worlds was the October 30th, 1938 broadcast by Orson Welles on the radio. Yeah. So people were so horrified by this broadcast that some committed suicide, thinking it was actual news, I guess they missed the small disclaimer or something they had at the beginning of that broadcast.
Yeah, the story is some people would call the cops, thinking what's going on? Are we being invaded?
So, that really captured the imaginations of people afterward and is fondly remembered, right? And so, but in film, the idea of space travel was depicted right at the beginning of the medium itself, right? With the silent film Le Voyage dans la Lune. Or,
Jesus.
More boringly in English, A Trip to the Moon, directed by Georges Méliès in 1902.
That's one of the most famous little pieces in film, right? Where the spaceship gets stuck in the moon's eye or whatever.
Right, yeah. So the rocket ship, it flies directly into the eye of the man on the moon, right? So in this early film, a group of astronauts travel to the moon and discover it's not what they wanted it to be, and they have to travel back to Earth to escape their alien predicament, right? I've never seen this, but I've seen clips and images. And I know it's incredibly famous, but it's probably something I need to see as a movie lover. But moving forward to film history, though, into the 30s and 40s, science fiction was not always the most used genre outside of some amazing German expressionist examples. But in America, most space set movies were serialized and episodic, like Buck Rogers or Flash Gordon. Aliens in these were kind of humanoid, right? I think probably because special effects and costumes that we would normally associate with aliens were years and years away. But then World War II happened, and subsequently America was plunged into the Cold War, right? So communism was seen as a real threat to the American way of life. And the idea of these people infiltrating our society was a very real fear for people. Like McCarthyism was all over the place, and even Hollywood couldn't escape that.
The Red Scare.
Yeah. So these ideas would make their way into film, and most were evident in the sci-fi movies of the 50s and 60s, where they could use aliens and invasions in a more like allegorical way to, you know, talk about the way that people felt during this time. So 1951's The Day the Earth Stood Still was directed by Robert Wise and has the alien Klaatu and the robot Gort arriving on Earth with a very serious message for the human race. And ultimately, this movie would be seen as addressing the fears and anxiety of the Cold War and arms races that were happening throughout the world. Later in 1956, Invasion of the Body Snatchers was released. This was directed by Don Spiegel. And this movie has aliens replicating Americans by growing doppelgangers in pods. And it's not long before the main characters don't know who is human or who is alien, to a very disturbing effect. It's not difficult to find the subtext in this movie for sure. And it's also been remade like many, many times throughout the years, most notably for me in 1978, starring Donald Sutherland and Brooke Adams, and has become sort of a cultural sci-fi touchstone.
It's true. Although the first one still has a 98% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, though a 78 version has a 93.
I mean, it's a fascinating movie. You can see clips of this movie shown in other horror movies like Gremlins and things like that. I think a lot of people, you know, recognize it as one of the better science fiction horror movies, right?
Wasn't there like a more recent remake with Daniel Craig and Nicole Kidman that was retitled?
I think it was just called Invasion or something like that. Yeah. And then before that, there was like a 1989, 1990 remake too. And I mean, there's just been lots of like iterations of the Body Snatchers.
Yeah.
Not all aliens in this time period were humanoid like they are in those movies, though. So they began, as time went on, to become a little bit more monstrous. So in 1958, The Blob with Steve McQueen was released, and this movie features a giant gelatinous creature trying to devour a town and everyone in it. Also remade later on. In 1968's Day of the Triffids, based on a novel by Joan Wyndham, shows us a world where most of the population has gone blind following a meteor shower, and they have to start battling an invasion of very tall plant-like creatures. So,
isn't that the same year that 2001: A Space Odyssey came out?
Yeah, I think so. 1968. Yes, you are correct, sir. So, in the late 60s and 70s, like you say, like we got some really grand sci-fi epics. Like not all of them had aliens in them, like 2001: A Space Odyssey from Kubrick from 1968. In 1977, we had both Star Wars by George Lucas and Close Encounters of the Third Kind directed by Steven Spielberg. They didn't really depict aliens in a very threatening manner, but they were very integral to the plot and the characters of both film, right? And then all that would sort of change in 1979 with Ridley Scott's Alien. So again, we were shown how devastating an alien life form can be, and he sort of brought the horror back to the concept of extraterrestrial life, right? At least in my opinion.
Until E.T. came out.
Yeah, no shit. So the 80s. The 80s gave us the battle of differing alien plots, right? With battle being sort of the operative word. So it seemed that if there were alien movies released, they would fall into two camps, right? Like family friendly or really, really gruesome and violent and horrific.
Yeah.
So we were given like cute and cuddly aliens and like E.T. and Mac and Me. And then we were given like these...
Forgot about Mac. I forgot about Mac.
Such a goofy looking alien in that movie too, but it's super cute, you know? But on the flip side of that, we were given a lot of like militaristic plots of great sci-fi and alien action movies like Cameron's Aliens from 1986, which we talked about this month, and then John McTiernan's Predator from 1987. And both of those movies gave us alien creatures that were sort of hell-bent on destruction and then like humans' battles to destroy them, right?
Sure.
And then military motifs like didn't really stop there. They were evident elsewhere in the 80s. John Carpenter's The Thing from 1982, while not dealing directly with the military, still had this sort of military vibe all over it, and it featured some really great weapons and like action shots. The 80s also saw a return of the message sci-fi horror movie with John Carpenter's They Live in 1988. Although, like, this one's really heavy-handed and one doesn't have to look, like, too far to find the message in that like they would have to in, like, 1951. fun, right?
Yeah.
So the 90s brought us sort of a culture of alien abduction, right? So everywhere you turn, from books to TV shows like Unsolved Mysteries, like the world was sort of flooded with stories of being snatched up by aliens for like dastardly experiments and things. And
X-Files and all that.
yeah, exactly. And so like one such movie that came out in the 90s, 1993 to be exact, was Fire in the Sky, which shows some pretty horrific scenes of what those experiments might look like, right?
Yeah.
The 90s also gave us a lot of like really sexy movies, you know, Basic Instinct and the like. And
Species.
yeah, so the alien genre was not too far off from that, right? 1995, the movie Species was released, starring Natasha Henstridge among a really stacked cast. And it's trying to show like researchers desperately trying to track down an alien seductress before she mates with a human man, right? Also in the 90s, like the teen culture sort of came back with a bang, you know, it was Scream and like Dawson's Creek and Buffy and things like that. And like we were given The Faculty. So that sort of like had a very prominent cast of young, attractive people fighting off aliens who are trying to replace their teachers and students at their school. It became a pretty big hit. Moving into the new century, though.
Well, wait, like there was also this huge thing with like the 1950s style alien invasions. Like Independence Day was probably the most popular alien movie of the 90s, right?
And I really thought about putting that on the list. Like I was trying to stick to horror, and I wouldn't call that a horror movie, but like Independence Day was by far one of the most...
There's some adjacency, obviously. But
yeah, it was like one of the biggest hits of the 90s, right? I think everybody saw Independence Day. And you're right. I mean, it had to deal with aliens and invasions, and that was right smack in the 90s where the things that we were seeing from aliens were sort of different. It was a definite callback to those earlier sci-fi movies. The 21st century has had its share of alien movies as well, but their plots are sort of all over the place to me, like borrowing from every decade that sort of preceded it in some way. There are abduction movies, there are replacement movies, you know, there are some war movies. But what stands out to me the most about alien movies in the new century is the idea of humans having to adapt and live with aliens who have tried to make a more permanent home on our planet, right? And there's been lots of examples for this, but the two that really stick out to me in this like sort of like new way of thinking about aliens are Neil Blomkamp's District 9 from 2009 and John Krasinski's A Quiet Place from 2018. You know, I think these movies take very different ways to tackle the idea of what humans would do, like if aliens were living amongst us, right? And but they show them both in like very terrifying ways, you know. And so like obviously this is a very, very brief history of aliens in movies. There are just countless amounts of film and good film that deal with aliens in some way. What, you know, like Alien Nation, I think, is one of my favorite movies, you know, and it's just like too hard to create a history that talks about everything and still like, you know, try to keep it as brief as possible. So, but that's pretty much it. That's what I got for you.
Well, that's a long evolution. And, it's interesting viewing these as kind of like message movies and their evolution through that, because it seems like there's some really good movies about, aliens that don't necessarily have a message. I'd almost say Alien is one of them. It's very pure in what it is, versus like even Aliens is kind of a message, kind of an allegory to Vietnam. So,
well, I mean, I think that alien movies themselves is just a really easy way for us to talk about anything that's going on in like current history, and sort of it's a fairly easy way to mask all those things, right? Can you look at some of these alien movies from the current century, right? Things like District 9 and They Live, A Quiet Place. I mean, they could have their own messages about living in the kind of society that we do, or the way that people fear, their neighbors in some way, right? And it may not be something that we recognize right away. I'm not sure that everybody in the 50s and 60s were watching things like The Day the Earth Stood Still and being like, oh, I get it, Like it takes some time for scholars to sort of, pick up on those things and write about it. So, I mean, who knows what can happen in the future.
Yeah, I have a feeling we're going to get some weird alien invasion movies where like the aliens are completely peaceful and everything else, but a bunch of, anti-science, like, conspiracy nut theorists or whatever, and leadership are going to be totally fucked, and it's going to ruin it for everyone. And we're going to get into some sort of intergalactic war that just destroys the planet almost instantaneously, all because of, stupidity.
All because people won't wear a mask. I mean,
or
yeah.
they don't believe in facts anymore, or, you know, things like that. You know, it's just, it would be interesting to see. I know that those movies are going to come out soon because there's going to be a huge reaction, you know, in pop culture to, you know, whatever side you're on, you know, to the Trump presidency and, you know, this past election and people's reactions to, you know, regardless of politics, to this pandemic. You know, there's just a lot of stupid happening, and, you know, I feel like we're gonna get to see some allegory pretty soon. Hopefully, it's gonna be interesting.
I completely agree with you, and I mean, I know that film always sort of like follows what's going on culturally, and it's just a matter of time before people start putting this into their movies. I just think that genre films like science fiction and horror and even action to a certain extent, like it's just easier for them to do it. So we'll see it there first for sure. But with all that being said, I'm really interested to hear the 10 movies that you've chosen to talk about for aliens and horror.
Well, I'm afraid that my top 10 isn't going to be as profound as your history lesson.
That was not even profound, but thank you for saying so. That makes me feel a lot better.
Because my number 10 is Critters.
But Critters is so good.
Especially the first one. Although I do have a special place in my heart for the second one. And even the first one, like, which is easily the best, is a 55% on Rotten Tomatoes.
That seems incredibly low to me, actually. I think a lot of people like that movie, but hey, I don't.
And the second one is, you know, where they go into the giant fucking ball.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Like hundreds of them, and they just roll over someone and they end up being a skeleton or something.
As soon as the ball rolls over, it's like the skeleton underneath it, right?
Yeah. And so, but a lot of people forget that their critters are not the only aliens in those movies, right? There's like intergalactic like critter hunters that come, and they're like shapeshifters, and they crash their ship and everything else. So depending on the movie you watch, but it's one of the most interesting subplots about it. But Critters is one of my earliest horror films that I remember watching, and it just happened to be on TV when I was a kid. And of course I was too young to realize that it was a comedy as well.
Yeah.
You know, and so I had nightmares for probably years, because I probably saw it when I was like 6. And I had nightmares for years thinking critters were under my bed, you know?
Oh, shit.
And there was some real gore in Critters.
Oh yeah.
And especially the first one. And man, you know, it's scarred me for life, and it's probably why we have this podcast.
I mean, everyone has those horror movies that they remember fondly when they were younger, and I mean, I know that you've oftentimes with me talked about Critters, so I'm not surprised that it's on this list.
Mm-hmm. So my number 9 is The Arrival from 1996, starring none other than Charlie Sheen.
I've never seen this movie.
It's good. You know, it's a definitely a science fiction horror film. And, you know, back then I was, you know, much more interested in, you know, pure sci-fi or pure fantasy or pure horror, you know, but this was one of the first, you know, mixes outside of like Alien or Aliens that I'd seen. And it's really good. It's like a thriller. You know, it's got a 64% on Rotten Tomatoes. I didn't know it was Charlie Sheen at the time, and it's almost an unrecognizable role for him. You know, he's got this big chunky glasses on the entire time, and he's like a TV satellite, you know, salesman or whatever. And it's just a really interesting story, and he has to, you know, kind of travel and problem solve and deal with scientists and like figure this out, but it's very small scale, and it doesn't necessarily have the most positive ending, which I actually am, you know, partial to. And so you know, I would definitely recommend this, for especially because I think most people probably haven't seen it.
I mean, I remember it on the shelves when I worked in video stores, and I just never watched it, probably because of Charlie Sheen. But I mean,
well, I don't think he had a bad rap back then.
No, I mean, I guess not. I don't know why I didn't watch this movie. It makes no sense. It seems like something that I would have watched. I think Fire in the Sky like scarred me so much when I was younger that anything that was sort of like real aliens, quote unquote, I was like, no, fuck all that. I'm not watching none of that shit. So, and it's like actual, like the little gray men, right? That people would think of from. Kind of.
Well, I mean, it kind of plays like a long, more horror-esque episode of X-Files or something. Okay. You know, and it does get like kind of bigger and bigger, and you realize the scope of it kind of as its ending. And it's like one of those. It's so it's pretty good. I need to go back and watch it, but it's been quite a while since I've seen it. But
I mean, if you're going to put it higher than Critters on the list, that means I definitely need to go watch it.
well, I mean, it's a better movie. Okay. Let's face it. Critters is like one of those guilty pleasures, that I had to put on the list just because I have such a personal history with it.
Yeah.
So number 8, I put the Cloverfield franchise, especially 10 Cloverfield Lane. Although I did feel a little guilty about that because you don't kind of like know that it's an Alien film until like the last like 10 or 15 minutes, Yeah. And, of course, the first one made a lot of waves, the found footage film. And I find that it's kind of an interesting genre jumping franchise. I have not seen the one that came out on like Netflix or something that was kind of
Cloverfield
added as
Paradox
Cloverfield in post or something. But I think 10 Cloverfield Lane was actually renamed and added as Cloverfield in post and made into a Cloverfield movie. So this franchise is very loosely tied together. But because they have such varied and interesting entries, I felt like I needed to add it here. I'm really trying to create a list where there's not all just gray aliens or not just all monster aliens or not just all invasion movies. So where there's some variation,
right?
I
like the Cloverfield franchise. I mean, I haven't seen the Paradox on Netflix either. I heard it was just like monstrously bad.
Trash, yeah.
And I didn't see Cloverfield until years after it was released, and I was pleasantly surprised. I think I watched it right around the time that 10 Cloverfield Lane was released because, I was super interested to see that movie just based on the cast and its premise.
Oh, and the cast is so good. Mary Elizabeth Winstead and John Goodman, especially John Goodman, are just amazing in this film.
I mean, it's a very good movie. Just love it. I love it to pieces.
It's one of his best roles, in my opinion. So coming up at number 7 is Annihilation from 2018, starring Natalie Portman, directed by Alex Garland, who's just got this really small but amazing, film career that we're definitely going to be watching, the more we go through time, because he is responsible for a lot of great writing for like 28 Days Later and Sunshine. His directorial debut was Ex Machina, which was just great.
So good.
Yeah. And so, this movie, like I sat down and watched it just recently, and I was like, this is so much more horror than I thought. I thought it was like a hard sci-fi film. And of course, I know that when you watched it, you were thinking it was more horror.
Yeah. We had the total opposite reactions to it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it has Jennifer Jason Leigh, which I wasn't expecting. It's got a lot of interesting ideas in it. It's very original. It's also very unoriginal at the same time, but it looks great. And if you like a slow burn with a lot of interesting, side quests along the way, I definitely recommend it. It's a little bit more cerebral than your average fare, and it's a little bit more, it's a little bit more melancholic than your average, sci-fi horror fare, I would say.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I enjoyed this movie quite a bit. Like you said, I was expecting a lot more horror than what I got, based on how you've talked about it since you've seen it recently, I can see, a lot of the horror elements that are there, right? And I appreciate them. But, to me, it was just like it was a really good science fiction movie with some horror qualities, but it's a fantastic movie. It's completely well acted. I like the way the places the story went. And so I'm really glad that it's on your list.
So my number 6 is A Quiet Place. And this was, a pretty big surprise, right? It was directed by John Krasinski and I believe written by too. Although it says the story is by Brian Woods and Scott Beck. But, this was something no one really expected to be any good. It's John Krasinski and his wife, Emily Blunt, making a horror movie, and it turned out to be excellent. And I think it got so popular that I think people started to, like with anything that gets too popular, people started to have some contempt for it.
Yeah.
Popularity breeds contempt, and I think that it's, after these first few years of contempt or first decade of contempt, I think that as it gets more sequels, especially if this next sequel coming out this year is going to be really, really good, then, you know, we're going to have a classic franchise on our hands, especially considering that the first one was just so good. And it got a 90% on, or 95% on Rotten Tomatoes.
I mean, and it was Oscar nominated, right? I think for score. And there was lots of Oscar buzz. Or maybe it was something else. Maybe it was a screenplay. God, I can't remember. But yeah, it was completely surprising to me. Like I was expecting just some like random horror movie, and it turned out to be so incredibly heartfelt and just so well acted. I think Emily Blunt is amazing in this movie. Mm-hmm. There was lots of Oscar buzz for her performance in that. And I think that anytime a horror movie garners that kind of like buzz around it, I mean, like it's something special. And even though people like to trash all over the popular things or whatnot, doesn't make them less good, you know?
Well, and you know something's good when there's a bunch of imitators that come out, rushing to try and do it. And we saw several,
Bird Box,
if they can see you, they kill you. If they hear you, they kill you type of movies, right?
So, but yeah, it was excellent. And excellent placing on your list, I would say.
So my next film at number 5 is Attack the Block. Also a huge surprise. This one coming out of virtually nowhere. This is a British science fiction film coming out in 2011. And of course it was, kind of the breakout role for John Boyega, who would go on and star in Star Wars. It also has Nick Frost, which is of course kind of a horror and genre, savvy guy. That's no stranger to the genre, with Shaun of the Dead and, The World's End and some other things, including Paul.
I still need to watch Paul. I still need to watch Attack the Block. I haven't seen this movie yet.
Yeah. And so it's, the film is about like a teenage street gang who have to defend themselves from predatory alien invaders in South London on Guy Fawkes Night. And they don't have weapons. Guy Fawkes Night?
Yeah.
So Guy Fawkes Night, or Bonfire Night, is an annual commemoration observed on the 5th of November. Remember the 5th of November? Have you ever seen V for Vendetta?
No.
My God, watch a fucking movie.
Okay.
So this is the big fireworks night in Britain, right? So it's like when Guy Fawkes, a member of the gunpowder plot, was arrested while guarding explosives that they had placed beneath the House of Lords. So it was a big revolutionary moment that they stopped.
Okay.
So that's Guy Fawkes Night. And it's basically their Halloween and 4th of July kind of wrapped up in one. So anyway, they've got fireworks, they've got swords, they've got whatever they can get their hands on. These monsters are really original. They're basically just big black blobs with fangs, giant fangs, and they're all kind of like animalistic in a way like Alien is. And they're like pitch black, like you'll notice that you can barely tell there's any detail on them besides just blackness, arms and legs, and teeth.
Aren't the teeth like glowing a little bit or something, right?
A little bit, yeah. They can. I think there's like some glow in the dark stuff going on, but I just remember being blown away when I saw this, and I need to see it again because I've only seen it the one time. But it was excellent.
Well, this has been on my list to watch for quite some time, and I remember you telling me how good it was when you saw it, and I kind of figured it was going to be on your list, so I went ahead and purchased it on Amazon a couple of days ago. I just haven't had a chance to watch it yet, so I mean, maybe after this recording, I'll finally be able to sit down and watch it, because it's like really high on my watch list, and I really want to see it.
So my number 4 is the Predator franchise. So the original Predator is a classic, even though it still only has like an 81% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is still high for a genre film, I would say.
Oh, yeah.
I wouldn't say it's as good as like Alien or Aliens, or even some of the others that are coming up on my list. But Predator is a classic. Of course, it stars Arnold Schwarzenegger and
Carl Weathers.
Yes. And it's theoretically, of course, it exists in the same universe as Alien, which may exist in the same universe as like Blade Runner and stuff. So what an interesting shared universe that is. But, I do remember seeing, this is before the days of the internet and stuff. And I watched like Predator 2 and I saw the Predator ship and I saw the alien skull in there. I was just like geeking out.
Oh, yeah.
So hardcore. But the first Predator is just really a classic in the, science fiction action horror genre, which there aren't that many, And so, if you're going to have a nice, science fiction action horror film night, you watch Aliens and Predator and you're not going to be disappointed.
remember seeing that skull in Predator 2, right, toward the end of that movie, and just thinking, oh my God, like, how neat would it be to see a movie with the two different aliens together? And then we got it, right?
Yeah. We don't talk about those.
And it's a thing, I mean, they're not terrible. It's fun to watch, like, if you're not expecting too much. But yeah, I mean, like, it wasn't as good as I wanted it to be, you know what I mean? But I remember how excited I was as a kid, like seeing that xenomorph skull on that wall, that ship, and then we got those two.
I feel like anything they made after 1986 pretty much cheapened the whole franchise to varying degrees. Alien 3 is on the fence. It's on the cusp. Resurrection definitely started to cheapen the franchise, in my opinion. Yeah, it's a clone.
Yeah, well, let's put a pin in it, and we'll save that for next year around this time. Let's talk about the cheapening. It'll be the Alien series of deep dives, the cheapening.
That will just devolve over the next couple of years as we get closer and closer to Alien 5 Prometheus 2.
That's right. So by the time we get to 2022, and we're talking about those two movies, it'll be like 7 or 8 minute episodes, and we'll be like, here's the synopsis, they exist. Yep. Sweet dreams.
So my number 3 is going to be a little controversial, probably, because it's Under the Skin from 2013. And of course, this is directed by Jonathan Glazer, who makes a film like every 10 years or something. He made Sexy Beast in 2000, which was like up for all kinds of awards, and then Birth, and then Under the Skin. And this is only his third movie, right? In 20 years. So, I really, really dug the shit out of this movie. It's a really slow burn, so be prepared for that. I'm really trying to get Robert to watch it again, or at least watch it for the first time, because I think you turned it off or you fell asleep or something.
Yeah. So the first time I watched it, I woke up in the middle of the night and I could not go back to sleep. I was just like scrolling through things to watch, and I was like, oh, Chris recommended this one, so I started watching it, and then I felt sleepy enough to go back to bed. But I finished it, later on. It just wasn't my favorite, but I, like most things, like I say, I need to rewatch it, and like you speak so highly of this movie that I know I must have missed something.
I just love the visual storytelling. It's like visual storytelling, the horror movie. And the music in this is just amazing by Mika Levy, or her stage name, Mikachu. It's been one of my go-to horror film scores for a while, that basically ever since it came out. And I can't say enough about this. So if you're okay with slow burns, if you don't need explosions in your face every 5 seconds, watch this movie. You'll enjoy it. I'm
probably only going to watch this movie again in one of two ways, okay? Mm-hmm. Either you put it on the docket for us to cover, which I fully think that you should, okay, or I watch it with you, like with you in the same room, like sitting next to you on the couch. I think like those are the only two ways that I would probably watch this movie again, even though I want to see it, but these are the two circumstances I'd like to watch it. I'd really like to watch it with you.
Either way, I feel like you'd enjoy it more with a little reefer madness.
Probably, and I also think I would enjoy it more watching it next to somebody who appreciates it. And if I wanted to pause the movie and talk about it for a minute, I would like to have you there with me to do so,
Yeah.
So maybe the next time that I'm in Boston, we sit down and watch Under the Skin. How about that?
Well, one thing I really like about it is it really kind of examines what it is to be human and what is empathy, and how that kind of evolves over the space of the film, and how that brings vulnerability to this character who wasn't vulnerable in the start, and it's just a really interesting journey for the main character, which happens to be this fucking killer alien that's just completely predatory.
I will say that Scarlett Johansson looks amazing in this movie, though. I mean, like she always does, but I mean, like from what I remember, I really enjoyed her performance in that movie. Yeah. Like I said, I think I just missed something along the way. Like obviously, because a lot of people like this movie. I think it's pretty highly regarded in a lot of circles, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, to be fair, it's not the most poppy movie. It's just it's kind of more of an experience. As douchey as that sounds. I mean. You really kind of have to be in the right mood for this versus like watching, Aliens or something will put you in the mood. You have to be ready and open for Under the Skin, right? So it's not as accessible. Certainly not as accessible as pretty much anything on my list.
Okay, well, listeners, we'll report back later for my rewatch.
Mm-hmm. So my number 2 is none other than The Thing from 1982.
Yes!
The only remake on my list. And this has made quite a few of our lists, I think.
Throughout the history of our podcast, yeah, I think that it first popped up on our top 10 remakes list.
We had best special effects person award, I think that they made it. And I think it might have made an appearance for music, maybe not sure, maybe as a special mention.
I know it definitely made an appearance whenever we did our top 10 sci-fi horror countdown when we did Sunshine that month.
Yeah, sure.
So,
and of course its music is by Ennio Morricone, who we just lost, unfortunately. So
I know, it's so sad.
Yeah, but this is one of my favorite horror films, I think, of all time. And this is by John Carpenter, the master. And he really got pacing down for this and tension up. And it's just a masterclass in that, in pacing and tension. And as far as like in-camera special effects and makeup effects, it still holds up today. There's a few exceptions, especially at the end where they revert to like stop motion. This is before CGI. It's from 1982, but the vast majority of the film just looks amazing to this day. And it's like I said, it's one of my favorites.
I have to agree. I mean, I do love The Thing. I think when you're talking about aliens and horror movies, this one's really cool, right? Because I mean, it's everything, and just like so nasty throughout most of it. It's just like gross. And Us, right? So I mean, like, it's just another one of those like message sci-fi alien movies like I had talked about earlier. I wish I would have thought to like call this a message movie too, because I think that there's something deeper inside The Thing than most people realize. And John Carpenter is oftentimes remembered as being, like the father of the slasher film with like Halloween and stuff. But I think the larger percentage of his movies are sort of like sci-fi or fantasy-based horror. And he does it so well, right? I mentioned They Live in the little history lesson, but I mean, like he does sci-fi horror great. And I mean, he really is the master of that particular like subgenre of horror as far as I'm concerned.
But it was also kind of a new way to do that kind of like witch hunt movie, like Invasion of the Body Snatchers or The Crucible or any of these where you don't know who's who, And it was just a really interesting take on that, and I really loved it.
Yeah, that scene with the blood, right? Where they're testing the blood.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and for 1982, I think that sends a pretty strong message, So.
And there's some great quotes in that too.
You gotta be fucking kidding me.
Yeah. And like, if you wouldn't mind, I'd rather not spend all fucking winter time to this fucking chair.
Oh, I do love
There's
The Thing.
a couple, yeah.
But if that's your number 2, I can only guess what your number 1 is.
Well, of course, my number 1 has to be the Alien franchise, especially, of course, Alien with 98% and Aliens with 97% on Rotten Tomatoes. We just covered these movies. Obviously, this top 10 is influenced by what we deep dive. And, to me, you can't get any better in alien horror movies than Alien or Aliens, period.
And I agree. And I think that our deep dives sort of speak for themselves. They're sort of the longest episodes that we've ever had here on the Film Flamers. And that just goes to show you like how much both of us appreciate these movies, from an alien level and from a horror level, from an action level. Like I think we really enjoyed talking about them.
Poltergeist is probably going to be 4 hours long.
Probably, yeah. So, when we get to Poltergeist, guys, just like sort of plan a road trip around our episode because you're going to need to do that.
We'll see. But I do have some special mentions.
Okay.
I have not seen Forbidden Planet. I have not seen either version or any version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And I haven't even seen They Live yet because we are going to cover that this month for Patreon, but we haven't done it yet. We've been so slammed trying to kind of like record and edit around vacations and things like that. Yeah. These, like, my watch list for this list is kind of limited. And so that's why I say, like, I may have to go back and watch some of those to see if they land any higher than, Critters or The Arrival, which I'm sure they will, so keep in mind Forbidden Planet, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, especially the 78 version, and They Live, because they will probably eventually, make their way onto this list.
Now, so I had not seen Forbidden Planet either. I just watched it today before we started recording, and I think you're going to like it. I think you're going to like it a lot.
Although I'm not sure it's a horror movie, right? Is it straight sci-fi?
It's a science fiction movie with a lot of like horror elements, right? There's definitely a crazy like alien or something kind of monster, right? That they don't really know what it is. But I mean, it's really tense. And like, a lot of those movies from the 50s, like The Day the Earth Stood Still and Body Snatchers, they were pretty straightforward in their approach to sci-fi, right? Despite the message that was sort of hidden underneath it. But this one, I think, is kind of like, the thoughtful man's science fiction horror movie from the 50s, right? And it's like, it's very educated feeling, and I could see how it influenced Alien a lot when I was watching it, and Aliens too, and I mean, in a lot of other sci-fi horror movies, really. Okay. I think this is just like the granddaddy of all influential sci-fi horror movies.
I might have to go back and watch everything that Alien was influenced by, and including Planet of the Vampires and things like that.
I saw Planet of the Vampires when I was very young, very late night on like TBS or something one night. It's silly, but it's fun. But I mean, Forbidden Planet, I think, should be, something that you should watch quickly. I think you would like it. And I kind of am interested to hear what you think. So,
okay. I'm sure I'll be, especially if I watch it tonight or something, I'm sure I'll be kicking myself that we just recorded this top 10.
That's okay. This is why we have a podcast. We do these top 10 episodes, and oftentimes months or a year later at this point, I've gone back to look at the list or listen to the episodes again, and I'm like, oh shit, why didn't I think of this one? Or why didn't I put that on there? Or I'll watch something that's been on my watch list for a long time. And so like, there's going to be some times that we may have to go back and revisit some of these, or at least have like a special, episode where we say, here's 5 more that we want to add to it. It's bound to happen eventually.
Oh, definitely. I can see us updating at least every few years our top 10s,
I mean, because I've been updating my, sort of running top 10, top 20 favorite horror movies. And, I mean, even that changes a lot. So,
sure.
I mean, listeners, this could pop up again.
Yeah. As we watch older movies and as new ones come out.
But for the time being, that is Chris's top 10 aliens and horror films. I like it. That was a really good list. Those were good choices.
Well, thank you.
So I'm super pleased. And I'm going to go watch Attack the Block for sure.
Well, guys, I think that about wraps up this episode of Top 10 Alien Horror Movies.
And wraps up this month of episodes. So we really hope that you've enjoyed all our content in July. We really had a good time deep diving into the Alien and Aliens and making these lists and history lessons. And, we still have something coming up for Patreon. We'll be talking about They Live, like Chris said. So head over to patreon.com/thefilmflamers, where you can catch that bonus episode of Flamers Flashbacks and all the other bonus content that we've put out there for you. Also, like always, we would like to know what some of your favorite alien horror movies are. You can let us know on social media at The Film Flamers on Twitter, Facebook, or even Instagram.
Or email us at tiredqueens@filmflamers.com or call our hotline at 972-666-7733. Leave your message and we'll play it on the air on the next Shooting the Flames episode and respond to it. We haven't gotten any voicemails in a while, so please take the time.
That's right.
We love them.
We also haven't gotten any reviews in a while either. So if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts or iTunes, head over there and give us a 5-star rating or a little snippet of why you like us, and we'll also read that on Shooting the Flames. So please, we really enjoy getting reviews. It helps us as a podcast grow and really just warms our cold dead hearts.
It does.
Well, I guess, Chris, it's time to blast off, right? That's so stupid.
I was going to do something like, well, Robert, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to stop recording so I don't have to spend the rest of this fucking summer in this fucking chair.
You gotta be fucking kidding me. All right, untie yourself so you can go have some
Sweet dreams.
She's been like, I want to get away from this microphone, you bitch.